handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, where we are having a fascinating conversation with Pete Turner, who is a combat veteran, a previous guest, and actually has his own radio show called The Break It Down Show. So, Pete, thanks for hanging here with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Before we went to break, we were talking about negotiations and looking at the Taliban through the Taliban's eyes instead of looking at the Taliban through Western eyes. And where we kind of left off, it almost tells me that we are necessarily looking at renditions again. Could that be possible?
Yeah. Yes, I'm positive that renditions are going to happen.
Me too.
I'm not big on it. Let me back out and say this. When I look at modern conflict, I look at 5 basic elements. Could there be more? Sure. Okay, but let's just talk about 5 for right now. And there absolutely is a military threat-based element. You have to dominate militarily. You have to matter. But if you don't matter socially, culturally, politically, and with the local religion, you're irrelevant. You're losing 80% of the fight every day. And what the enemy has learned to do in general, the worldwide enemy from the U.S., is just to be small and avoid big conflicts. We look at things like renditions and all these other things that happen as a result of military influence. Show me a general that has run the Taliban, show me a general that has run Afghanistan or CENTCOM that hasn't said, we're going to beat the Taliban. Every time they say it, and there's been 10 different CENTCOM commanders since we've been in Afghanistan. Some of them temporary, but 10 different people. And they all say the same thing. We're going to win. I need troops. I know what to do. Every unit that I advise, every unit, and keep in mind, I stay in the same area for multiple units, so I watch them learn, mature, and then they leave, right? So I see these things. They all come in prepared with a battle plan. And then it's up to me and some of my peers to say, I need you to slow down and understand that your battle plan is not going to work here. I know I'm one guy saying this, but you are not going to push the Taliban out. You're not going to destroy them. You're not going to encircle them. This is not a military unit that operates like that. They just fade back into the populace, and we stay on our camps and our compounds, and they know how to do this fight better than we do because they don't quit doing it. It's what they do. So we can do renditions. How many times do we kill the top Taliban guy? How many times do we kill the top ISIS guy? And yet the organization continues on. We can't rely on a military solution. We can't rely on renditions and all these other things. Look, we can drop all the Moabs we want. It's silly because it's not going to change the dynamic on the ground. We have a myopic problem where we see victory through military. And the reality is we don't need to win hearts and minds. The government of Afghanistan needs to win hearts and minds. So every time we invest effort there, we're investing effort in the Taliban's success.
Pete, Ashraf Ghani, is he? I don't think he's obviously nearly as corrupt as Karzai, but I'm not seeing a lot of leadership out of him. And I'm very, very worried that he's on the side of the United States, but I think he's just kind of sitting in his office every day doing a hookah and drinking tea.
Yeah, and I don't blame him if that's the case.
Okay.
So and this is why you have me on, because I know this stuff at the ground level. Here's the reality. We dominate everything that we do because we think militarily. What's a military commander's job? And I'm not being critical of what the military does. I'm a military guy. A military commander's job is to impose his will on the enemy, right? And so they impose their will on everything. Audacity, audacity, audacity. That's the commander's creed, basically. I'm going to be audacious and dominate this thing. And I tell this story all the time, but it's always true. Every time I go see a new commander, brigade commander, battalion commander, you're talking 5,000, 1,000 people, even smaller units, I say the same things to them. Like, what do you want to know? Do you have any idea what you're trying to figure out? And they'll say, and I like to do a Texas accent, like, yeah, Pete, what I'm looking for is a right belly button to push. I need to know all of the key influencers. I'd love to meet the most influential man in the province. And even though I just got there, I can always say, I already know who that person is. And that person is you. Until you stop being the most influential person in this region, there's no reason for anybody else to try to do anything. And this was shown in that War Machine movie with Brad Pitt. And that movie, I'd love to talk about some other time. But the key moment in that movie, and no one else knows to know this because they don't have the ground truth, is when the Brad Pitt character goes to talk to the president of Afghanistan. And the president of Afghanistan approves the mission to go push south and kill the Taliban. And then he says, it was really never my choice, though it was. And that's the key thing with all of these people. If an American commander can't surrender their imposition of will, if we can't discover, independently of our own influence, that's the big key, the local governmental leader's plan, whether it's the president or it's the governor of a district, which is like a county-sized government. If we can't independently pull that out and get behind their plan, well, here's the most powerful quote I heard the entire time of all my conflict time. There is only room for one sword in the scabbard. If we insist upon being the sword, what would you do, Denise, if you were the governor of Tampa? And someone came in and constantly told you what to do and constantly overrode you and did what they wanted to anyhow. I'd drink tea and suck on a hookah pipe. It doesn't matter what I do.
Who's the enemy in Afghanistan? Do we have, that deck of cards? I mean, do we actually know? Do we have 20 factions of enemies, terror groups? Are they prioritized? Is it the Taliban? Is it Haqqani? Is it the Pakistani Taliban? Is it the Khorasan group? Do you see where I'm going with that?
I do. I see where you're going, and I'm going to outflank you here. So here's the thing: when I go into a unit, even if I've been there already, I go up to the intel boss and I say, "Hey, intel boss. How many bad people are there in this province?" A province is a state, right? So in the state of Alabama, how many bad people are there that really just need to die? There's no fixing them. And they'll give you an idea. And literally that number often is 20. So how many people live in the entire province? 250,000. So 20 people are the people that we need to be most focused on. Yes. Do we know their names? Yes. Do we have profiles on them? On some of them, yeah. Okay, cool. We're focusing all our energy on 20 people. You can look and you can see profiles from them on the wall as we try to understand who these guys and what they're doing. Who is figuring out the most influential people in the region? Nobody. Who is focused on what drives affect with the people? How do you create fear? How do you create FOMO for the government, right? No one focuses on these other things because we always focus on threat. We always focus on military. How many of our operations have we run through our Jordanian partner who's sitting there so it's a joint force, right? So you got Americans, you got Romanians, you got the Brit guy that runs the Helo Ops or whatever, whatever these things are, and you've got a Jordanian sitting in the room. How many times do we just ignore that guy's briefing versus have that guy involved in every operation? So we say, how do we put the proper Islamic touch on this thing? And I don't mean to dominate Islam. I mean to respectfully consider it, to allow him to gather a council of imams or religious leaders or mullahs, depending on what country you're in, and say, yeah, this we like. We're going to bring religious leaders along. They're going to bring leaders in, and they're going to watch their Afghan forces cause this military operation to be successful. We never do that because we always focus on those 20 bad dudes, who, by the way, we don't catch. Yeah, we catch one, another one comes in. But honestly, when I look around, I'll ask this question as a teaching point to my unit that I'm supporting. When was the last time we killed a bad guy? Oh, it was like 6 months ago. We had that one operation. Great. When's the next one going to die? We don't know. Well, the people in the valleys want that. They want to know. They want to know that you're actually grabbing, because every night someone comes to their house, to their little cluster of homes, and they get housed, they get fed, they drink their tea. Let me tell you a real quick story, and I'm going to boil it down really fast. So we want them to believe in their police force. We have local American awesome law enforcement officers. This is not an indictment on those guys. I love them. I love what they do. They teach and train the local police how to do fingerprints. We have a fingerprint lab back in Kandahar or in Kabul or any of the major areas where you can send back evidence and we can prosecute a case. Keep in mind, Afghanistan has the least amount of laws in the world. And that's like known. So we have guys that can fingerprint people. So I go, okay, great, let's demonstrate this to the local elders. So we bring elders in and we do a fingerprint demo, and the Afghan cop first says, wait, we can do this? Keep in mind, this Afghan cop is the chief of police, and he has had this training.
And we bring them here to train them, too, by the way.
Yeah, sometimes. In this case, they were trained right there on site. But, yes, we spent a lot of money to bring them there. So he's like, wait, we can't do this. And the guy's like, yeah, we learned it like last week. He's like, oh, that thing. Oh, I thought you were playing. Like, I didn't realize that was real. He's like, yeah. And he's like, we can fingerprint? And so the whole time the elders are watching this cop go, I didn't know we could do that. That's not real. And so we do the fingerprint test. They figure out which it was me that had touched the cup. And then all the elders say, if we could do this, we could catch every Taliban guy because they drink tea all the time. We could absolutely give you guys these teacups and you could run it for evidence. But nobody in there understands what to do next. Like, there's this silence in the room. Like, wow, okay, great. You guys buy in, but the cop doesn't even understand he can do it because it's not real in his world. The elders are like, if you can do this, why didn't you do this a long time ago? And then the police guys are still trying to figure out how the cop didn't know he got trained in this. So it's a comedy of errors, you know? It's so hard to accomplish the simplest things when we talk about strategy and military and pushing forward and everything else. We invest in our own defeat all the time, Denise. And
I know that one.
Let me give you an example of perfectly honest things that are supposed to happen. The military is supposed to dominate militarily. So tankers go to NTC, the National Training Center. It's out between Vegas and LA. And they train pre-deployment. What do they work on? They work on driving tanks. How many tank operations are done in a year in Afghanistan?
2.
Maybe, yeah, if not none, right? Same thing for artillery guys. What do they work on the whole time they're there? And they rightfully work on combat skills. They're supposed to maintain their artillery proficiency. How many long tube missions are shot in a year in Afghanistan? Basically 2. None. We got 2, right? So we're investing all this effort into maintaining our military, and that's absolutely ethically appropriate. But
it doesn't apply.
Doesn't apply. Right.
All right. Now let me ask you this question. We talked about the Afghan police. And I still fret over vetting Afghan soldiers that we often have to coexist with. So having said that, on the Afghan soldiers component and the Afghan police component, what are the Afghans, instead of the U.S. military or ISAF taking the lead, has anybody, or are they, this is a stupid question, a Denise question, are the Afghanis themselves going in and talking to these tribal leaders and to the Taliban, and they put their foot forward instead of we doing it, so maybe it's received a little bit better? Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think I get your question, and I have an answer for you.
Okay.
And this kind of goes back to you talking before about the decades of instability and everything else there. So, and I can send you the link to the story. You can't read between the lines in the story because it's just too much. So I'm going to talk about it between the lines. So for decades, there's all these patriarchal people that die. And because there's not an established court system, because there is a lot of conflict, and because the government's rotated back and forth and vacillated, a lot of these things don't get solved. And so you get these Hatfield-McCoy type feuds that boil, they run hot and cold. We struggle to deal with this. We struggle to even see the wins. So because I don't have to do, like, one of the things I would like to eliminate from the military when we go do these kind of operations is someone ever saying, I don't care what you want, Afghan government leader. My boss wants this.
Yeah.
Right? If we can remove that part. So I don't have to do that. I get to listen and I get to learn and I get to watch. And this elder, I started to create like this empowerment program where we got off his neck, started to ask him, and I built his plan. And the Army looked at that, and I'm saying the Army, the U.S. services would all do the same thing. They looked at that and said, impossible that he made this. And I'm like, it's impossible that he made the PowerPoint slide because I did it. But this is absolutely his plan. To go further, cause I knew they would reject the plan, right? And I'm giving them a win, and they're like, no, we don't want this win. I took the plan, I put it into PowerPoint in the proper format, and then I purposely jumbled the plan up so that when I handed the Afghan leader the slide that I had made for him, right, he would say, no, this is all wrong, or he would say perfect, and I would know that I screwed my part up. But he didn't. He took and he put it right back into the same order that he had it before. So this is genuinely his plan.
I was going to say, the one that's going to carry it out is when you give them the idea and you made them think that it was their own.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he took that and he started to show his people. It's like, I finally got the Americans to listen. We're going to be doing things my way. We're going to start changing. And what was the first thing he did? He dealt with this multi-generational land dispute that was super complex. And it took him probably 10 days of negotiating all day. He's like, just stay away. I would say, what can I do to contribute? How can I learn? Tell me no if it's okay. And he's like, I want you to stay away. I don't want anybody to come down. Keep the Americans away for about a week, and I will let you know when you can come down, and then we'll go forward, and I'll let you understand everything. And then so he went through this whole process, and I had very little contact with him, just a couple times in the evening when he invited me over, and that was it. But they went through this process, and they resolved this multi-generational land dispute. And this is an absolutely invisible win for the military that they couldn't even understand they had because they can never see this. They don't gain the trust to gain entrance into the room. So I'm in the room at the end of the whole process when all the thumbing and the signing of this creed for all these people. And who's there? There's no Americans. There's me, the reporter who was with me, who I was able to bring, and my interpreter. And that was it. And we watched them. They had an Afghan leader. They had a regional elder who didn't normally come to this area. A few other people that were tribally aligned in general, kind of like a council, but didn't really have a role. Their role was to be there to say, yeah, we're overseeing this and understand that this is working in a righteous way. That's invisible to us. We can't see those things. So as we try to solve these problems, we have to understand that all these other things that are happening are our victories if we allow them to be. But we have to slow down.
All right, let's go back to the machismo, how macho the United States is about to be. So I imagine that we've dropped in some paratroopers, or bring in the 82nd. We're going to bring in some more Marines, special operations, intelligence people, drone operations, maybe some more tanks, maybe some Moabs, maybe some, Stingers, So what are we staging right now that we're going to put on some big cargo planes and we're going to ship over there to show our muscle that we probably shouldn't necessarily have to do?
Yeah, I would take a tiny portion of that budget and I would hire guys like Pete to go over and look externally and honestly at what we're doing. To say, look, like I've written a paper on female empowerment in conflict zones. And one of the things we have to understand is that you don't just start empowering women. You have to work a path. And that path involves the military commander knocking it the hell off. Stop, chill out, slow down. Let us go figure out the key leaders we have to grab from the government. So then you go to the government, you're like, we would like to work on some female issues. What does it take to do that here? And then they start to lay that plan out. Now, and I'm simplifying the process.
Mm-hmm.
So you can fly a drone into whatever village you want.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what happens 5 minutes later. You don't control the message. You flew in a remote control. Let's do this. This is one of my tools I like to use for lenses. So I'm trying to think of a place, and let's fly a remote control airplane into Tampa, and let's blow somebody up.
Mm-hmm.
How does that go over in Tampa?
It probably ups the anger quotient by a factor of 1,000.
Right. So the more we do this remote control killing without understanding the messaging, we're missing out, and I'm really big on this, we're missing out on affect. We're creating a negative affect which minimizes our effects. So, yeah, maybe you killed a bad guy. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You're kind of not really sure, but that person, even if they're dead, can come back from the dead and still be used against you.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this stuff, again, that's focused on military. Why not spend more time not dominating religion, but understanding the religious requirements? Let me give you a real quick story. We'd worked on a literacy campaign, and part of the deal was, and I got to do it independent from anybody else. I didn't have any kind of real military presence other than where we did the meeting and my buddy and I being Americans. And one of the things we made sure was we asked, get this, we asked for appointments. Hey, we would like to talk to you about education, to the education minister. When can we do that, and where is it appropriate? He's like, please don't come to my office with the patrol. That puts me on Front Street, and I hate that, and it causes me problems. Mm-hmm. I would love to meet with you on the American compound. Great, come on in. Who should we have at this meeting so we can talk about this? This is like the next meeting. He's like, I need to bring some important family leaders, and I need to bring a religious guy. This guy could bring anybody he wants, and he chose 3 family leaders and a religious guy to validate what they were doing. Anything they do has a religious element to it. Let's spend money there, understanding how to leverage that to our advantage. Not dominate it, but leverage it to our advantage.
The fighting season.
Yeah.
That's another weird kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. They
and
try
how
to
does
take back.
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, they try to take back the advances that the Army will make, because they are limited on supply. They are limited to foot travel, motorcycle travel. And motorcycles, like, don't picture American motorcycles. Very simple. You're just not walking, almost like a cart and buggy kind of situation where you're just putting along. So these guys are limited, but that limitation works to their advantage in that they get to take time off, go home with their families, and there we are fretting, worrying, creating more anxiety and doubt in the region that we're working in. Mm-hmm. So the fighting season really kind of goes all year long because we perpetuate it by our presence. We go out, we make some progress, but that progress is quickly taken away as soon as the Taliban guy's back in town and everybody knows to shape back up. Like the American season is over, now it's Taliban season. I'm telling you, Denise, the fighting part of this thing is important, but we cannot talk exclusively about it. Every time.
Well, and that's why I asked about the fighting season, because I would think if you don't have a real conflict, you got a conflict calendar and a non-conflict calendar, to use that non-conflict calendar time to do more of what you're proposing.
Yeah, but I would say you don't even stop doing it. The thing is when that Taliban guy's there, right, and he knocks on a door, knock, 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 and he's like, hey, you have contact with the Americans. If you don't knock it off, I'm going to kidnap you. And that guy's like, I'm not doing that. And I'm like, well, Muhammad saw you, and that's all that matters. And then Muhammad may or may not have seen him, right? But the message is clear. Yeah. I have to knock this crap off. And so the fight is that fight, the affect fight. I'm going to lose every day. Like, our radio programming is terrible. We don't talk to the locals. And look, the Americans will tell you over and over again that they do all this stuff great. I'm here to tell you that they don't. So the fighting season, the engaging with people season is constant, and we constantly lose. We lose every day at that. We get our butt handed to us. So, yes, the military fighting part, of course it's important. But if I go out the next day let's say you do a farming operation to improve the condition of farmers without ever talking to the farmers about what they need or want, if I go back the next day and they're laughing at the ridiculousness of it, the fight that day, we shot ourselves in the foot on purpose because we just lost the attention of a lot of farmers who know that in 8 hours a Taliban guy could show up and say, why were you talking to the Americans?
Extort him. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Pete Turner, combat veteran, Afghanistan consult, has his own radio show, the Break It Down Show. And Pete, thanks so much. I mean, we could go on and on and on with this, but you're always invited back because I mean these are certainly piece parts that are not talked about with the media. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. Anybody who wants to ask me a question, I'm easy to find on Twitter, Pete A. Turner. And then I answer questions on Quora all the time.
I see that.
Pete Turner, and I'm glad to interact with people. And look, all this strategy stuff is great. Ground truth is, I'm going to say it, ground truth is Trump.
Thank you, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. There's more coming your way in the second half.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
Hi, this is Michelle Malkin from CRTV.com, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Denise Simon Experience, where our digital flagship station is talkamericaradio.us, and our terrestrial flagship is WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, serving South Georgia. And we're very proud to be a part of those networks, and even more proud to have with us Pete Turner. Now, Pete Turner is a previous guest, kind of a distant buddy. You know how that social media thing goes. We meet more people in social media than we'll probably ever see face to face. But he also has his own radio show, and that's called the Break It Down Show. But Pete is a combat veteran and did his time in Afghanistan, and that's going to be the topic of discussion. So, Pete, how are you?
Man, I am good, and thank you so much for having me on, Denise. I really and truly, I mean this, I really and truly appreciate you, your time, your audience, and I'm just going to do my best to give you guys some interesting stuff to think about, and I just really am thankful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Afghanistan's a forgotten war until, I would say, here recently, when you've had some commanders that have been sounding the clarion call here to government, Pentagon, White House, National Security Council, CENTCOM, and all the rest, like, hey, we got some troubles here because we are not only holding a status, we're losing control. So, and that's been, I would say, Pete, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that has been as a result of kind of a hands-off kind of deal during the Obama administration, where Afghanistan wasn't just getting the attention that it was supposed to get, most of which I would argue is I don't even want to say rules of engagement, because I'm not completely convinced there were any rules of engagement. And now we have a festering problem here that the Trump administration knowingly, I would say, inherited. But what say you?
Well, let me first just say this. The rules of engagement are out there. They are, the problem with rules of engagement is the trust that you have to have in your command and hire. And there flat out are stories of service members being and still remain in prison for doing what I think I would do, the same action. When you engage someone who's the Taliban and they had weapons, it's really tough to understand and trust what's going to happen if you engage. Mm-hmm. That's common for all conflict. So the rules of engagement are there, and depending on the command and how they support. Look, I know a specific incident in another conflict that I was in. I was in the units working with them, and a young soldier turned and engaged a vehicle that got too close to a patrol. Now, look, people died, and it's a tragedy, and it was most likely unnecessary. But the command said, the threat is not what you think it is. I want all my lower-level commanders to adjust how you are talking about threat and vehicles approaching the patrol. We understand that person made a call in the moment, and we're not going to go against them because they're in the field doing it. And it's tough, but we're going to err on the side of the soldier's decision in this case. That's the good side. The bad side is sometimes you engage people and, it gets sideways on you fast, and all of a sudden your future's out of your control. So for sure, the rules of engagement thing is very complex, but it's always complex. It's really command driven. The other thing, talking about like the Obama administration and the Trump administration, let's first back out from that and just understand that this is an exceptionally challenging problem, and our organizational intelligence is high, but not directly associated with what we're trying to do here. Let me say this in a different way. We're bringing a dream team hockey team to the Olympics to play volleyball. So you've got great players. You've got world-class talent in the field that you want, but it's a different game. And so when President Bush sets up a fantastic strategy on paper and it doesn't work as well, President Obama gets to come in and change it and say, we're not going to do that. And then when it starts to fester, like you're saying, and I think that's fair, President Trump gets to come in and say, we're going to go in a different direction. None of those guys should expect different results, though, because the strategy and the ground reality don't connect. And that's the big point that I'll be making as we talk throughout this next little bit of time.
Cool. The first thing out of the chute is we've heard we're not going to do nation building.
Yeah.
In the garden variety definition of nation building, I think I can understand that, but I don't know that you can go as far as we have gone for, I'm not going to say 17 years or 16 years, because I think the conflict there is manifested into something now other than what it once was. But I would say in some cases have had success at building infrastructure there and winning hearts and minds, such that there's some faction of Afghanistan we're neutralizing, and they're beginning to kind of go back to some kind of, what I don't want to say westernized definition of normalcy, but in other regions we're clearly not doing that. So define where we are with nation building and what it really means.
This is a great question, and one of those concerns that is a multi-administration type problem. You know, you had a definite nation-building approach through the Bush Doctrine, which President Obama largely sort of mimicked, and you're trying to create stability at a base level. The problem, again, is the strategy and the ground truth don't connect. So President Trump, and listen, I have all the respect in the world for Secretary Mattis. I have nothing but the highest marks for him. He's doing something that's really, really impossible to get right, and very tough to know in the moment if you're trending in a good way or a bad way. We have stalled. We are losing ground. Now ISIS is a problem in Afghanistan where it wasn't before. All of these things happen. And this also goes to, and I'm freestyling a little bit here, but the overall question of should we stay or should we go, right? There's a cost regardless. So if you don't mind creating a festering pool of misery, of exploitable people, of terrorists, of just different perspective on how life and how the world should be, then we should leave that area and accept that cost. If we're going to be there, and this is me bringing it full circle, then you can't say you're not going to nation build. I mean, our mere presence is a nation building operation.
That's right.
You know, we're going to spend money. There are so many facets to this, Denise. It gets crazy really fast. But when you go to a conflict zone, instability is the norm. And the people who live there are better at instability than we are. We live in a stable world. We don't understand an unstable world. So we're going to bring our form of stability in some form or fashion to that area. That's nation building. We're going to spend money. We always look at Afghanistan and say, look how corrupt they are. And that's really what I've learned from being on the ground is that's the wrong approach, because corruption is as corruption does. If you bring money to usurp the power that's in place to create an infrastructure, that's corruption. So you can't say you're not going to nation build. You can't say you're going to attack corruption when your mere presence causes those two things to happen. We are nation building. There's nothing we can do about it. We are corrupting. There's nothing we can do. We are going to undermine the powers that exist. Has to be. We have to start from that position and understand that, again, this stuff's really hard. And I have a lot of rules for stability operations in conflict zones. The first rule is you're going to make mistakes. We suck at admitting that we make mistakes, which is breaking the first rule. You know, like you have to admit we're going to get this wrong a lot, and it's going to be tragic when we do. But over the course of time, a place like South Korea emerges and becomes stable and becomes a world leader in economy and all kinds of other things. But that stuff takes decades of screwing it up to get it right.
Well, Pete, you know, when we talk about going into Afghanistan in 2001, we were going up against, I think what George Bush said necessarily was a faceless enemy, such that from a Geneva Convention standpoint, which we are adhering to, the enemy does not. And we can't play any other way. We can go up to the legal limits, and in some cases have jumped over those in extraordinary circumstances. But when you've got an enemy that's not wearing a uniform with some kind of flag on their shoulder, where they have been at war a whole lot longer in that region than we could ever possibly really define, even going back to when the Soviets went in. And before that, you've got an enemy that I would say, has been at war all of these generations, correct?
Yes. Yes. And this is why I say they're better at instability than we are.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and our presence creates more instability. So who's going to adapt to that better, us or them? And again, there's so many things that we could discuss about this. But yeah, going back to George Bush's initial strategic push was to teach and train, to balance things out. And then you can see general after general talking about teaching and training, advising. You'll continue to see this strategic thread going through, whether it's General Austin, who's really big on the advise and assist concept, or any of them. Just look at their background and you're going to see these elements in there. It's really hard to advise and assist when conflict is the norm, when instability is the norm, because you have to focus, and you're never going to see this in the strategic or the tactical training or discussion. You'll never see the Americans talk in terms of establishing, building, and testing for trust. If you, like when I go and I sit down across from a leader, I don't want to accomplish anything. I want to listen. I want to understand their reality. And I want to slowly start to build trust. Now, I have the luxury of doing that. A lot of commanders don't. That's why I can go out and represent the command in a way that's much more slow and deliberate. Because I know that this is not a path of least resistance problem. This is a critical path problem. And you have to start with establishing trust. You just won't see that. When we do look and hear about trust, it'll say, build trust. Where's the how? Where's the test? Those things don't exist. So as we go into a community, and I'm going to get real psychological here, you've got people with a schema, right? This is their world, their norm, and it's warped because of the tragedy, because of the pain. I've interviewed thousands of people in conflict zones, and one of the things that's common is they act a lot like abused kids, abused spouses, and this is honest, they simply can't dream. They don't dare to dream. Like I'd play a game and I'd ask questions. I would say, let's say I could give you $1 million, $5 million, whatever it is, any amount of money you need, what would you do? Where would you go? And they can't deal with that because it's impossible. We're talking about, I would always say like the moon and carrots. I'm talking about carrots and they're talking about the moon. They're totally different things. 250,000 miles apart. They're nowhere near each other. So if their schema is bent, damaged, warped, it's just like dealing with Indians on the reservation, right, where they have a completely different version of reality and there's a lot of pain in there. You can't just come in and say, here's your modern amenities, and then leave. You have to start with establishing trust and understanding their reality. And we refuse to do that.
Well, and you bring up a very good point because we have a situation where you've got very different tribal factions all over Afghanistan. And some of them may be Taliban tribals and they're community leaders. But that's not the same one that's over here 30 miles this direction or 80 miles another direction. So, I mean, each tribal elder is maybe being bribed a different way from the Taliban, or maybe they are in fact Taliban. So one model can't fit all sectors, correct?
Yeah, and let me fracture that even further. We were talking about some radio type programs, my research partner and I, and we were talking to locals. And this is a group of people that we had established trust with. They respected us as scholars. And although we were with the military, they saw us in a different light. So they were able to be candid. One farmer said, I love the radio, and I wish I could listen to it and enjoy it more. And maybe even as an old guy, I would like to develop some literacy. But I cannot. And he's like, you guys must know about this in your country, which is a big thing about trust right there. You guys must have this. I cannot get the radio out of my daughter's hand. It's not my radio, right? And so we get a big kick out of this because we're like, yes, we all identify with this. Next dude says, if I don't mind literacy, but if I hear anything else on that radio, I'm going to start slapping my kids and enforcing the law. Now, this sounds barbaric, but you have to understand that in his world, where the Taliban has an immense and direct influence, he is the government. He is the police. And he has to protect his family by ensuring that everybody knows that he's on point with the entire game of strict Islamic orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So his hitting his kids and admitting that openly is him telling the group, I am not part of this Western movement. I am absolutely protecting my family in the way that I know how. Now, he may even be on board with the Taliban thing, but we can't just see that as a barbaric act of child abuse. It's how he does stability. And again, we suck at instability. So this is how he does it to survive. Mm-hmm. That's how problematic all of these things are. These guys live maybe 3 miles apart, and they have widely different views. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about Taliban and tribe and bribing, and keep in mind, every time you say bribing, I want you to insert, we also bribe too. We also
I was just going to go there, Pete, and that is often we have to pay off, we have to bribe the Taliban because they set up these dynamic checkpoints. We got to go from point A to point B. They're listening on radios. They're all of a sudden going to go to some road. They're going to set up some kind of a checkpoint. We got to pay them to get through. So, I mean, we don't have a choice.
Right. That's the system we work in. So I want to say one thing about that choice and that route. So I've seen this, right? You go into the PRT headquarters, which is a provincial reconstruction team. These are the Americans that are trying to work on the overall nation-building problem. And I'm unfairly painting them in a very broad fashion, but that's, for the purpose of this conversation, that's what they do. Mm-hmm. On the wall in their headquarters is a picture of them opening up a route. Let's call this route Broadway. And it's like, look at this successful mission. There it is on the wall, recorded for all of history. Well, not even 3 months later, that route's closed. So you go home as a PRT service member thinking, I won the war. But the guy that stays multiple units gets to look and go, how many times are we going to open Route Broadway? Because we keep doing this and it keeps closing. And instead of doing the path of least resistance and smashing our way through and having a route for 3 months, why don't we figure out why that route can't be open? Mm-hmm. And yes, I know it's Taliban influence. That's great. Now you've answered the first question. What's the 53rd question in that puzzle to understand all the information so that you can start to find a way to make this thing work? We don't approach things that way. We just say, we're just going to open it. We smash through, we open it, and then slowly but surely the Afghan forces are overwhelmed by fear, by a lack of resources, by death. All these things take and make it so that the Taliban, again, gets to win. Here's the bigger problem with this. Every time the Taliban does that, they get to say, we won. We killed 50 Americans. True or not, does not matter. We continue to tell you that we will be the predominant force in this valley. Look how powerful the Army is from the United States, and look how many times we beat them and keep this route shut. You guys will not go down this route, or we will kill you. Who's in charge in that area? You want to win hearts and minds? They've already been stolen.
Can we keep hearing this chatter that we're going to go back into negotiations for some kind of a peace deal with the Taliban, which was obviously tried more than once and for a very long time with the Obama administration. I say that's a fool's errand. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
Oh,
but the practical advocate in me says you're wrong. So here's the reality is, when I go around and talk to these farmers, and this is a Taliban region, Mullah Omar has family in this region. And I talk to them and I'm like, what's holding you guys back from investing in the government? And I'm asking these questions in a way that makes a lot more sense on the ground, but for brevity's sake, I'm saying, why not invest in this government? And they're like, well, this is the Taliban's region. They own this. And you guys aren't going to stop that from happening. Now, let me put some context into this, right? This is ground truth. This is what ground truth is. It's why it's Trump in everything that we do. we never arrest or kill Taliban bad guys in that area. And we would be wrong to do so because we would be running roughshod over everything, creating more instability, right? So they have the influence in that area. They are the ones in charge. So when we say the Taliban's not going to be part of it, and then these guys who live literally in the Stone Age, when they do go to town and get their news and they hear that we're at the negotiation table with the Taliban, they're going to say to me, and they said this to me, but you guys are negotiating with them. They're already going to be here. They're going to be part of the government. There's no way to stop that. Mm-hmm. That may or may not be reality in the long term.
I can see it. I can see it.
But it's their reality, and until we can change their view, our view is irrelevant. So
correct.
We have to figure out how to deal with that Taliban problem. Would I like to see their influence reduced? Of course, the Western in me wants that. But the field operator in me says, how are you going to accomplish that? That's great. But how are you going to convince Sheri, Sheri Mullah, all these guys who are out there doing their farming thing, how are you going to convince them that their life is going to be improved and actually real without the Taliban around? It's almost easier to say, yeah, the Taliban is going to be part of this solution, they're part of this country. We can't wash that out. And when we go to, and this, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead, but when we go to solve some of these strategic problems and we need the individual tactical wins to do it, and the ground truth is tied into that, here's what this looks like. You open up the Mullah Omar School for Girls, and you build it in traditional fashion, and you put it into the village. Now when the Taliban comes, they're like, well, what are we going to do about this? Now they have a problem they have to solve because it's community-driven, it's built in their fashion, it's got the boss's name on it, you know? And I'm really simplifying a complex thing, but when you think in these terms, it's like, oh, wait, don't build a Western building. Build it in a way that doesn't stand out. Build it in a way that's normal for them. Let's give these guys a chance to adapt to new reality. Let's not jump this. They can't have a fire department, you know? That's not possible out there.
Gotta have water first.
Yeah. But we want there to be a fire department. So all of these things impact our strategy and how we do it. The ground truth, it looks ridiculous when you look at it from the reality of, I can't find the government here. Can we just figure out how to make some government show up? And then you start asking those questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Peter Turner, obviously a combat veteran, Afghanistan, who has been a real on-the-ground kind of, I would say, consult expert on this with where we're going into Afghanistan with some additional troops, dropping in some 82nd Airborne, some all of those kinds of people. We look like we may be heading towards I think we got some number around 50,000 there. It looks like we're going to be going way ahead of that number in a big way, not too shortly, not too distant future. And I think it's going to be a stepped process. We're going to come into this break, and on the other side of the break, I actually want to talk a little bit more about the Taliban's staying power, fighting seasons, vetting Afghan soldiers in Pakistan. We kind of covered the tribal faction and the nation building. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, stand by and we'll be right back.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark
ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, where we have our digital flagship is talkamericaradio.us, and our terrestrial flagship is WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM, serving South Georgia. And we're proud to be a part of that network, and even more proud to have Tom Del Beccaro with us. Tom Del Beccaro is a previous guest. He's a big contributor to Forbes. He's a tax man in a big way. We've talked about tax policy before, and he has his own website, Political Vanguard. Is it .org or .com, Tom?
It's .com, and we just rolled out our whole new edition of which you're a contributor.
Yay!
Yesterday. Pretty proud of it.
Yay, yay, yay. Congratulations on that.
Good. We were actually the first website on the West Coast, the first conservative website in 2002, if you can believe it. Which actually people don't remember. There was barely any websites back then. And there really wasn't. It was new. Al Gore had just created the internet. You know, people make a mistake when they joke about him because they say he said he invented the internet. That's not what he said. Inventing's for men. He said he created. That's much more divine, don't you think?
I do. We're so thankful.
And I'm certain that that's the way he felt about it.
Indeed so. Now your new launch of Political Vanguard is reaching out to what kind of audience?
Well, so our tagline is politics and perspective. You know, we live in this, what I call the divided era, and what's happened, and this happens when there's intense division. The news, the media splits into camps. You know, during the Civil War, and the lead up to it, there was a Republican newspaper and a Democrat newspaper in every town, and they were run literally by party people. And today we're splitting up into the conservative media and the liberal media. And what we're trying to do is provide you with the stories that are based more in fact than commentary. And then we provide you with commentary that tries to put things in perspective so that people have some historical reference to what's gone on before and what may happen in the future. So we're not a website that rah-rahs one side or another. I mean, we have Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters. But the main point of it all is to give you some historical reference.
But you know, there are some things, Tom, and I hope I'm not necessarily overstating it, but there are some things that both sides can literally come together on, and we never seem to use that as a jumping off point in order to have rational discussions, do we?
Well, increasingly less, and that's a function of the spoil system. You know, the main source of division today is the magnitude of government. It's handing out $6 trillion in spoils a year. And as a result of that, what you get is this intense competition to hand them out, and then parties become really powerful. And then it's all or nothing. It's either their camp or ours. And it takes a very special person to bridge that divide. You know, when Kennedy became president of the United States, he was the first president to lose more states than he won. And it was pretty obvious to those at the time that the state of Illinois was delivered to him through illegal voting. It was a very divisive period. Reagan, of course, took over in an intensely divided era as well. And both of them did something very important. It's really what Trump needs to do going forward, which is both of them took over with weak economies. And what both of them did was set a national goal to revive the economy, but instead of demanding that one sector of society pay for it with tax increases so that another sector supposedly couldn't get the benefits from it, both of them, Reagan and Kennedy, set a national goal to revive the economy, and what they did is they married their political future, dependent on a good economy, with private initiative. And both of them said the way to do this is to cut taxes and let Americans rebuild the economy. And they were both very successful for that. Of course, Kennedy was cut down, and Johnson did his tax cuts, and they were very successful. Had 3 straight years of growth above 5.5%. Today, we've had a decade of less than 2%. And, of course, Reagan did it as well. Reagan had quarters with economic growth above 6%, 6.75, one of them. So what Trump needs to do going forward is set that national goal. Say, I'm not going to divide you up. I'm not going to send somebody a tax bill. What we're going to do is make it easier for you as Americans to succeed, and you will bring the economy back. And I'm very hopeful that this tax package that the Republicans roll out, which should, by the way, have been rolled out on January 22nd, the day after the inauguration, but they didn't. So hopefully that's the takeoff point, and we can talk in more detail about how taxes or how tax cuts lead to a revived economy. But we need to get the economy going. They're finally coming out with a tax package, and I'm in California here. I'm running a big campaign to support that.
The platform or the basis for your campaign is a contributor to the Trump administration, or is it there to just create a national dialogue putting pressure on Congress?
Well, interesting. It certainly is to push the dialogue along. That's really the big issue. We haven't had enough dialogue. I have been complaining about Republicans in one of my most recent Forbes pieces about the big mistake Republicans make, which is they stop campaigning when they get in office. The left doesn't do that. They campaign all the time, 365, through unions, otherwise. Republicans win elections, win a majority. They win the presidency, they win the Senate, they win the House. And then what do? They just go to Washington, D.C. and argue with the Washington Post and with Chuck Schumer or Harry Reid. They stop the campaigning. So what I advocate in that piece is don't do that. Keep the American people on your side. You know, Maggie Thatcher, and I know you know this, said that first you got to win the argument, then you can win the vote. Republicans don't get that. So we have to go out and win the argument, and that's the idea behind it.
Well, I would say, to be honest with you, Tom, it's kind of a 2-track deal. I mean, the Republicans are the ones that have to kind of, in the congressional level, have to kind of get down to the meat of the matter and get some things on paper and go to committee and all those other kinds of things. Yet, I would say, you've got all the PR liaisons out there, the Rush Limbaughs of the world, or the Mark Levin, those that are on radio and those conservative print media outlets are supposed to be getting those talking points and continuing to help with that campaign. And I don't see that conservative media, which I think consumes and has the majority of the airwaves, is doing that job. I think there's a big problem with some kind of mobilized effort here. Did I get that right?
Yes, in part because they're obsessed to too far a degree with look, they're not all on the same page. That's the bottom line. The Congress, the president, and the conservative media are not all on the same page. Now, who are you going to blame that on? I don't understand. You know, you have the Congress say, "Oh, give us the House and we'll make a difference. Give us the Senate, we'll make a difference." No, we can't do it until you give us the presidency, and then we get that, and they still can't make a difference. So there's that problem. And then there was the Never Trumpers. But here's my perspective on all of this. Right now, the tax code's not working. The reason why the economy is being held back is because the tax code is lopsided, anti-incentive, 73,000 pages long. If the Republicans want to win next year, the best thing they can do is the best thing for the country, which is to unleash the economy, which means scrap the tax code, clean it up, however you want to describe it, and let the economy take off. Now, if they can't accomplish this in the next 3 months, we may not have tax reform for a decade or more, because they could lose the House, and then you'd never get tax reform, and then who knows what happens to the presidency. So, I mean, Republicans need to remember how narrow their victory was in last November. I mean, Trump won Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to get the presidency. That ain't going to happen too often in the red state, blue state world that we live in. So they need to deliver on this. And tax reform should be incredibly easy, because even in places like California, where they're raising taxes left and right, independents want tax reform. So they need to get on the same page that you described that they are not, or this could get really bad for the country and for Republicans.
I'm a little concerned because you got the Ways and Means Committee, which is at the core of tax policy. And I think that there has been too much compromise. And if we eliminate one tax, it's kind of like, okay, but then the next thing you know, we have all these bills that go through for whatever, and they've dumped in a fee or some other tariff or some other cost. So it's necessarily applied someplace else. In order to, replace that, because we have all of these entitlement programs and interest on the debt that has to be paid and paid and paid and paid and paid and paid. And we still haven't stopped really the spending. So there's a lot of moving parts. And when you listen to the chairman, Kevin Brady at House Ways and Means, I think he gets it, but I don't know that he's able to recruit anybody else. The committee level may somewhat understand it, but it's I don't see any promotion. I don't see any push. I'm real concerned. It's kind of like it isn't going to happen. Ways and Means looks like it's kind of dead in the water to me, and that's the most prestigious committee that we've got. There's got to be some, precisely. And we've been in IRS tax policy with these 73,000 pages for decades, in some form or fashion. And, we come up against the old thing, you keep doing the same thing over and over again. And we're not really, I think, looking at new kinds of out of the box thinking when it comes to tax policy. Are we just sort of stuck because we know that we're going to have some Democrat votes, and the only way we're going to get them is if we keep throwing them a bone?
That's an interesting way to put it. No, I think it remains the job of Republicans to go out there and sell that to the electorate. They're for it. Taxes are never a popular thing. So this should be an easy sell, and it usually is. And so there's only really one thing they can do, which is go out there and make the case. And people are willing to listen to the case. No one thinks they're undertaxed who isn't Warren Buffett, and he's a fraud about it, given that he knows exactly why we have lower capital gains rates. We should have lower rates overall. Mm-hmm. So we don't really look, my tax plan was one sentence. It was pretty simple. It was simply all taxes increased or instituted since the 1986 tax reform bill are hereby repealed. That's it. So
okay. Case closed.
You don't have to be complicated about these things. And what the country needs is stability and saying, okay, for the next X amount of months, this is the way it's going to be. So, no, the laws of economics don't change. So you don't have to be creative with tax policy. You just have to restore incentives and give people a chance to run out and make a living.
I'm kind of curious, how come we don't seem to have any hearings on tax policy?
This is another one of those things where what's going to happen is that the bill's going to come out. Well, you're going to see hearings after the new bill comes out. But, remember in healthcare, Paul Ryan made the calculation that what he's going to do is spring it on people, and the Republicans are going to be so desperate for a bill that they'll just pass it. And, of course, that wasn't true. With tax reform is less complicated than Obamacare. Doesn't involve goring anyone's ox. I mean, the thing about Obamacare is when you do something with it, by definition, someone has to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting tax rates and isn't that way. Now, some people say, oh, well, yes, it is, because you're taking away loopholes. On the other hand, when you're lowering rates, you're giving them actually a better deal. So it's much easier to do taxes. And hopefully the Republicans will come out there and fight for it. It's certainly what's needed.
It's remarkable to me that there hasn't been some kind of a video. I may have discussed this before, that there hasn't been some kind of a video presentation on repealing and I guess all the fraud and collusion and corruption on Obamacare, such that we could embarrass the Democrats and it would have been repealed just after somebody watched a 15-minute video. I would argue pretty much the same thing when it comes to tax policy, that there ought to be some kind of video, PowerPoint, automated presentation for the world to see, the nation to see, that would torpedo their argument of the rich don't pay their fair share of taxes.
I've always made the argument that you are making, that actually the last royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, said paraphrasing, that it's always easy to convince people that they are ill-governed. Mm-hmm. In fact, it is. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans don't go out and make the case as to why this is all a failure, so help us do something about it. You could not be more accurate. They should be doing those things. I advocate all the time that what Republicans should do, I did it in my book, The Divided Era, which you can get on Amazon. What they should do is take it program by program and say, this is the VA program. Here's what it was intended to do originally. Here's why it's not working. Here's our reform. Here's why our reform will bring better care. Here's why it'll be at a lower cost. Please support it. And go around the country and drum up support.
Yes.
It would be an easy thing to do. But politicians, I don't know. If I was speaker, I would do that. If I was president, I would do that. That's what they need to do. Go use the bully pulpit. They could not have a larger bully pulpit at this point. And remember, the bigger government gets, the less efficient, the less well that it does. Given that, it should be easy for them to go out and convince people, but they never seem to be able to do it.
Well, and when I look at some of these hearings that that's being held by Ways and Means, we end up talking about disability benefits and Social Security, or some kind of labor force, aging men, and some kind of retention policies at the IRS. I mean, something about the jobs report. And we're never getting to the meat of the matter here. I mean, we talk around the elephant in the room, but we never even look at the elephant. And we're not getting the talk.
That is a function of bad leadership. If you start out in the weeds, then you, by definition, don't have someone that is advocating the big picture. And with taxes, the weeds are individual deductions. The big picture should be a flat tax. And so that's the error they're making. That's why Reagan did well, is he went out and said, look, here is why lowering rates is good for the country. He didn't say, here's why this tax deduction or that is good or bad. He started big picture. Lower rates, and you get expanded business opportunities and more. You wind up with more tax revenue, which is true. We've had 4 major tax reforms in our history. Every time the left said, oh, no, you can't do that, it'll cost government money, as if it's the government's money to begin with. And every time revenues have gone up because the economy has expanded, more people are working, and therefore more people are paying taxes, therefore revenues go up, and of course government spending goes down because the more people working means less dependent on government and therefore less outlays to them. Pretty simple, but you need a big picture guy selling it.
You know, the one group or the agency that we don't hear about, Tom, too, is Treasury. I mean, all we're hearing is we got to increase the debt ceiling. And so we don't even have. Sorry?
Yeah, this is the problem with trying to manage government instead of lead the country. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the debt ceiling's a government management problem. So this is why they should have come out forcefully in this presidency and still can and say, look, we've got to move the country forward. That's our goal. Our goal isn't to manage the economy or tell you how to live your lives. Our goal is to unleash America. And the way to unleash America is to help small business. And when you do, that's what Reagan did. Reagan didn't get in the weeds. He didn't even want. Do you remember who the Treasury Secretary of Reagan's, who it was?
No.
No, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't remember cabinet members unless they're potentially Secretary of State.
Yes.
By the way, which used to be the road to the presidency, or at least they thought so when the country first started. The plum job wasn't vice president. Plum job wasn't Treasury. It wasn't Secretary of War. It was Secretary of State because you had that higher profile. But at the end of the day, it's about a president going out and selling it, and they're starting to do that. You saw them doing it in Missouri. Mike Pence is starting to make the rounds. This should be the biggest campaign they have because if they do this, they can win next year. If they don't, it's pretty dicey.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Well, you got a minute and a half. We need to sell your book, and we need to sell your new website. So 1, 2, 3, go.
The book's called The Divided Era. It explains why there's ever more fighting in America. And it isn't because Donald Trump, and quite frankly, it's not because there was Obama. They were just players. It takes our three most divided periods in history, Civil War, Reconstruction, Revolution, the Constitution, and after that, the Gilded Age, and explains how we fought over issues in the past. Today, we're fighting over spoils. And so it's slightly different. And we did fight over spoils in the past. But the idea is to get people to understand that government action breeds division. The larger government is, the larger the division. Helps you in your discussions with people. The Divided Era, you can get that at Amazon.com, or you can just go to the link at politicalvanguard.com. All new websites just came out. And Political Vanguard, dedicated to giving you some perspective. It's not clickbait. It's not, I know you hate that. Not, it's meant to give you some understanding so that when you go out and talk to people, you have a better chance in the discussion. And Denise, I appreciate you bringing me on tonight.
Thank you. Come back, because I mean, this is a tax discussion's not one that's going to go away certainly anytime soon. And if nothing else, you and I can help, be part of this mobilized team to push it. And congratulations on your new website at politicalvanguard.com.
All right, thanks so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
Hi,
Hi, this is Denise Simon, the host of the Denise Simon Experience. I feel compelled to tell you people that Don Newen is my favorite talk radio host, period. Not Mark Levin, not Rush Limbaugh. I can't do this.
Do it, Denise. Read it. Read it, Denise.
Not Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, but yep, Don Newen. Cowboy Logic Radio is featuring the ever-stellar, highly gifted Don Newen right here on Talk America Radio.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio. On behalf of my beautiful co-host, Donna Fiducia, I'd like to express my gratitude to Denise Simon for those kind words. I don't think I could have done it better if I would have written that myself. Cowboy Logic Radio, every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Talk America Radio. This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, where our digital flagship is talkamericaradio.us, and our terrestrial flagship is WDDQ, Talk 92.1, serving South Georgia. And thanks for staying with us. I would like to introduce you again, because she's a previous guest, and that's Sheri Few with USPIE, which is the United States Parents Involved in Education, of which Sheri is president. And they're on another quest, and I like these quests, especially after what we're seeing going on in education across this country. And so I'm so delighted to be able to give Sheri a platform here, because I'm not sure we're making the advances that we need to make in education, certainly public education. So Sheri, thank you so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
You know, you guys are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, I would say a kind of a nationwide network. And what you're trying to do is, I guess, get the federal fingerprints out of public education. And I guess it's not just public education, because we got all these different kinds of platforms. We got charter schools, and you got homeschooling, and you got public, and then you got, all these kinds of things going on. And I guess some of those things are good, but I don't see a lot of continuity or cohesiveness, or, it's almost like a real unmatching patchwork of education and teachers and syllabus and all that kind of stuff. Did I get all that right, Sheri, or am I just mad?
No, you did pretty well with that. All
right, cool. Summary. Thank you.
Well, yeah, our mission is specifically to end the U.S. Department of Education and all federal education mandates as an organization. We came together as leaders from states all across the country who had been leading the fight against Common Core in their states. And as most of your listeners probably are aware, Common Core was a horrible set of standards that was foisted on states. Many states were bribed into adopting them, and parents hate them. They're very devastating to children, and really are causing harm to children rather than improving their learning experience. So we fought in our states for several years, and we recognized at about 4 or 5 years in, when I expanded my organization into a national organization and it became U.S. Parents Involved in Education, And I asked these leaders from across the country to join me. And let's just talk every couple of weeks about what's happening in your state and how we can share and how we can move from where we are. And what we realized is everybody was having the same experience. And they fought hard for 3 or 4 years, got good legislation passed to rewrite the standards, only to have the standards rebranded and put back out there with another name on it. So that's when we decided, after many discussions, that the biggest problem with Common Core was the federal government. The federal government is the one who pushed them on us. They mandated them through testing requirements, which is still happening. And so we saw the need to target the U.S. Department of Education. Denise, you probably know that the federal government really has no business in education, that's something that should be left to the states. And since its start back in 1980, the budget has increased. I mean, it's just mushroomed, as you can imagine. The budget in 2016 was over $70 billion. And there's reports that $93 billion is what it costs the taxpayers in overhead and huge salaries for over 4,000 people that work at the U.S. Department of Ed. So that's just a little summary of what our mission is, and it is a big mission. But what we're doing our radio campaign about this week is school choice. Because school choice now all of a sudden seems to be a hot topic for many people now that we have the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, and that's her issue. And, the recent budget that was proposed would slash spending in lots of areas that we agree with, but it also increased funding for charter schools and other school choice options. So we thought it was time that people have a real discussion about school choice and what it means. Because as long as the federal government is pulling the strings, it's not an option we should consider. It is the federal government's meddling that has to end in order for us to have true school choice.
Some places have defeated Common Core, others not so much. Did I get that right?
Well, I'm not sure that any state has defeated Common Core.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Is because there are two main reasons. Is because the federal mandate for testing is still in place, and that's through the ESSA law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the latest iteration of No Child Left Behind and whatever it was before that. So that's what binds the states to the Common Core standards, is the testing mandates. And then the testing mandates are tied to funding, and that's how states are convinced that they must comply. If they don't test, I think it's 95% of their students, then they'll withhold Title I funding to states. And there have been some battles over the Title I funding for that very reason. And so even with ESSA, supposedly there was going to be all this flexibility where states are going to be able to write their own plans. Well, there have been several plans that have been sent to Betsy DeVos, who's supposed to be a conservative, and she has rejected them. So states do not have flexibility under ESSA. They are still being controlled by the federal government. And until we get the federal government out, we're not going to have the kind of flexibility and parental control that we think is necessary to restore good education in this country.
I looked the other day because I actually wrote an article myself because, it was the start of the school year for the majority of the country. And I trotted on over to see where the ranking was of U.S. education globally. And the percentile of where U.S. public education is as compared to other countries in math and science and in reading is just terrifying. We're way down into the 40 and 50 percentile bracket, which is, what did you say our budget was? 80 billion, 90 billion?
Yeah, well, it's 70 billion, and then they're spending in between land and structures and salaries, 93 billion a year. That's just the federal government, which is only 10% nationwide of a state's budget. It's only 10% of a state's budget. So just think how much money we're spending collectively. I haven't done the math on that yet, but it's huge.
And for us to be in that percentile globally on a education competition standard, I think is a travesty. I don't know what other countries necessarily spend. I haven't really looked at those numbers either. But we're not going, after all of these years, Sheri, we're not going in the right direction here, are we?
No, we certainly are not. We are definitely going in the wrong direction, and there's been some studies put out by the Cato Institute that shows that the increased spending from the time of the Federal Department of Education's inception in the late 70s or early 80s, I think it started out at a little over $4 million. Now we're up to the $70 billion, and one of their charts shows just a stagnant scores. Nothing has improved at all in all of those years and those increases of spending. And, we used to have the best schools in the world. And that is when we were teaching a classical education before the federal government became involved. And, some of us believe it's been an intentional agenda to dumb down the populace so that they can control. And not only control, but then there's the indoctrination that's happening in schools. So many topics are taught that are certainly unbiased. I mean, are very biased. They're not unbiased as they should be. And although we're a nonpartisan organization, several of us are unashamed conservatives, and we're, quite frankly, very frustrated at what's being taught in public education in these government schools.
Well, I'm glad you kind of went there, because that was actually one of my questions, and that is the syllabus. Some schools, I don't have kids in the hunt anymore. I mean, my kids are in their 30s, long since out of it. My youngest one, however, I kind of watched things begin to really change because I was very, very involved in his middle school and his high school for many, many reasons. And I watched the quality of teachers who had been there for years, this is public school, just kind of, deteriorate. The syllabus to me was like almost too easy. In fact, I don't think he ever read a book, and even, at his age, I'm not sure that he still ever has, although I spent a lot on college textbooks that I don't know why I did that. But anyway, here was a kid that was always on a roll, though, because it was always too easy for him. And so if it's easy for him and it's difficult for others, we've got a real problem here. And when you mentioned that we're spending in the tens and tens of billions of dollars, you would think that we would get it right after all of these years, such that every year we could spend $2 billion less, and the following year it's $2 billion less than that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it should kind of be going the other direction, spending less instead of spending more, because we've gotten it down. We've gotten it down to a finely well-oiled machine, and we're not there.
No, in fact, we're fractured. We're worse than ever. The money, because of the federal control, has, again, just really, quite frankly, damaged education, and it's damaging to children. It's not about academia anymore. It certainly is about control, and they, the government is trying to manipulate the economy, and they've been at this for a few decades, and that's why, in schools you don't hear about academics anymore. It's about the workforce and developing the workforce.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the public has bought into that, and they think that is the role of government schools, is to prepare children to fit into these little niches that the economy needs. And so the federal government is planning with the education folks the jobs that they anticipate we're going to have in the next 10 or 20 years. Yes. And then that's the courses, and then those are the courses they offer children. And as in South Carolina, where my kids go to school, they're all actually graduated now, but I've started catching wind of this with the school to work effort back when my kids were in school. But now when they enter high school in South Carolina, they have to declare a major like they're going to college. And then all of their courses are aligned to that major because they're preparing that child for that particular job. And guess what? It's not an unlimited number of choices. If you've got someone that's musically inclined or maybe wants to go into the ministry, or it's not there. It's not one of your options.
There. No, no. It has to be medicine. It has to be IT. Maybe some science, and that's it. So any of the fine arts kind of thing, as you say, music or art into itself, or literature, history, European history or Middle Eastern history, forget about it. The testing, you mentioned the testing standards. I'm of the notion that some of those results are getting manipulated too, in order to kind of cover up the real results that justify the spending and that justify the syllabus and that justify keeping teachers on the payroll that are not performing too. So there's a lot of moving parts. Do you think that those test results are getting manipulated?
Well, I think that's very possible. I mean, we saw in Atlanta where that was happening on the state level, and so people are motivated for. Yeah, sorry, I hate to bring that up, but people are motivated for different reasons, and believe me, education is a huge industry in and of itself. It is such a money making industry for so many people. The textbook people, now the technology people. All the tests are now required to be, or ultimately will be required to be online in the schools. And, we're not sure that technology is really the direction we need to go in education. So, you know what, Denise, we've covered a lot of ground here, but if you don't mind, I'm going to get back to the school choice issue for just a minute.
I was just going to take you there. No, that's good. So go there. Yeah,
thanks,
good.
Denise. Yeah. Well, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a conservative, and I talked with you before we got on the air that I've been involved with politics a lot. And, I started this organization. It was formerly South Carolina Parents Involved in Education, because my kids were in government schools, and I was very frustrated about what they were learning. And so, I've over the years, I've always been a proponent of school choice. And it was only until I had the opportunity to learn from some of the other leaders around the country who have been following education longer than I had. We had some healthy debates over school choice. And in fact, that's the whole reason we developed this position statement, because we knew we had to come to some agreement as an organization of leaders on what it is that we agree on. But they taught me so much. And just to boil it down to you, what I like to tell people is that if school choice means that a parent only is able to choose which Common Core school their child attends, then that's not choice at all. And that's what we have in this country. Every federal-driven school choice option is controlled by the federal government, the mandatory testing that I told you that's tied to these horrible standards. So we need to have this discussion all over the country, and we're glad that this is a prime time in our country to have this discussion because of Secretary DeVos's position. And we're even redefining the term. We don't think school choice is strong enough. We think the authority really belongs with the parent. So we'd like to hear people talk about parental choice rather than school choice, because parents are the ultimate authority and should be concerning their children's education. So then anything that's tied to the federal government or driven by the federal government, we don't support. And there are very few school choice options out there that aren't driven by the federal government. In fact, the only school choice option that we agree that we support is tax credits, because that means you have your own money, you go out and spend it, and you get a credit on your taxes at the end of the year for having spent your own money. That's the only way the government can't control what's happening. And a classic example of that is Hillsdale College developed a charter school program. And, it's a wonderful classical education model. And I think it's being taught in Georgia. And what they've learned is, while they're giving a wonderful education to these students in these charter schools, they're still required to do the federal test, and they are bombing the federal test.
Uh-oh.
So those tests are going to be used to probably shut down those schools and say that charter schools aren't effective. So as long as the federal tests are mandatory, and that's what they are, if you're going to use government money, then you are tied to the federal test. And that's our greatest objection to most school choice options. Title I is the funding for underprivileged students, and South Carolina, where I live, has a lot of Title I funding in certain counties. And there's talk now among conservatives it's called Title I portability, where they want to be able to take that money and use it in a private school. Well, along with that money comes the regulations and the mandatory testing. So it's really no different. That private school, if they're going to put that federal money in it, just becomes another government school. So that's why we felt like this discussion is really important right now for us to be having all over the country about what does school choice really mean, and what do we really need to have a free market education system? Because that was the premise behind school choice, and that's a great concept, but it's not a true concept until we remove the federal government control.
Sheri, you mentioned that they were bombing these tests. What's on these tests that they're not prepared for? I mean, is it just? I mean, it kind of. Yeah, help me with that one.
All right, I will. And it this comes from my experience with the Common Core subject. So if you can imagine, if you know the Common Core standards and the things that are problematic, which there are so many, let me just give you one example. The Common Core standards required an experimental form of geometry that's never been used or tested anywhere in the world.
Math. Okay. I know where you're going.
You remember the ugly math, the four different ways you have to know how to do it and all of that? So that's what they're being tested for. And the thing with the test is if you can't show your work, you might come up with the right answer, but if you can't show the funky way they wanted you to do it, you don't get credit. So that's why they're bombing the test.
Yes. Okay. I'm glad you reminded me of that. I see that every once in a while when I travel on over to Facebook. People are putting out these math puzzles, these math equations. I'm looking at it and tilting my head going, I don't know if I can do that. Oh, Lord. All right. So I'm looking at the Congressional Committee, and it's kind of interesting because the Congressional Committee for Education is titled Committee on Education and the Workforce. So it's a predetermined destiny here, I would say. I mean, you can't get industry out of it at this point. It's there. And so I had a lot of hope for Betsy DeVos that I was hoping that Trump would say to her, okay, you've got 4 years to eliminate the Department of Education. And now I'm hearing from you that we're not even a step better than where we were, are we?
Well, unfortunately, I don't believe that we are. Our organization did support her nomination. We were one of the few around the country that has been in the Common Core fight that actually supported her because she was involved with the Bill Gates money and promoting Common Core. So we weren't, we're not terribly surprised, but we thought it would be better as an organization to try to support her, knowing she would likely get voted in. And in fact, we're planning a meeting with some of her staff in October. And so, when you pointed to the name of the Congressional Committee over Education, I think that's really telling.
It is.
We have a lot of work to do, but we need to, and that's part of this radio campaign, is talking with people about, what are the policy changes we really need? Is it, because right now the whole Republican mantra is school choice. And we're saying that's hollow. You don't see how deep the problems are. So we're hoping that a bill that was put out by Representative Massey I don't have the number in front of me, but it's a simple statement that would close the U.S. Department of Education. And he doesn't think it's likely that it's going to pass, but he thinks that it is going to be the catalyst for the discussion that we need to have. So we're hoping for congressional hearings, and we're hoping to get a few folks on board, across the aisle if we can, to begin to understand the deeper implications of the federal government's control over education in this country.
We got a minute or two left here, and I want you to, do you have a chapter in every state, or are you looking for some more mobilized forces in every state?
We are absolutely looking for more folks to join on. At one point, we had 33 state chapter presidents, but I'd have to say in the last year or so, we've had probably half of that number that are just very active, very on board. They're working on committees. So while we have some chapter presidents, they're not as active as I like. So yes, we're still looking for help. So if people will go to our website, number one, USPIE, that's USPI.org, and click on Join the Movement, then that will put them into our email database where they'll get action alerts. And then they can reach out to myself or April and send us an email. If they're interested in starting a chapter in their state, we would love to talk with them. So the email address for April is just like it sounds, april@uspie.org. So shoot April an email, go to our website and join the movement, and let's work on this together.
And it's really, even if you don't have kids in a school system, if you pay property taxes, you're paying school taxes, so you have an investment, meaning you have a voice, correct?
Absolutely. We are all stakeholders in this because we are funding this mess. This mess, which I believe is fundamental to every other problem this country is facing. So we are all stakeholders, and we need to get involved.
Well said. Thank you for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. And I'm going to keep tapping you on the shoulder every once in a while because I want a status check. And thank you for the just excellent work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Denise. I appreciate you giving us this opportunity to speak to your listeners, and I'll look forward to hearing from you.
All right, good deal. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so make sure that you stay with us.